You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello. Glad to be back in your feeds so soon. Had that great conversation with John Guerra last week that we got out, and we're back. Like I said online, not quite ready to fully commit to being back in your feeds every single week, but I like the bi-weekly schedule. It gives us some room to work with, and with everything that I have in the can, I've got a lot of wonderful conversations with some great people. It would not surprise me if for at least a while there were weekly drops. So not committing to anything full time yet. I still am not quite to where I say I would like editing, because I love doing all these other things so much more, but getting better at it, figuring out ways to make that process go quicker and efficiently, because I really do care about putting out a high quality show for you guys. But all that to say, so glad to be back here. Here at The Substance, we're looking to have conversations that help us all better appreciate goodness, truth, and beauty. And today, we're doing so through our substantive cinema format. One of my favorites. We're back finally with a brand new substantive cinema. Previous guests for these include folks like New York Times film critic Alyssa Wilkinson, Film Spotting's Josh Larsen, artist Stephanie Stalvey, and our pals over at Letterboxd, Slim and Mitchell. And this week, we are rejoined by my internet pal Mike White from the projection booth and Spencer Parsons, and we are looking at the film of one of my favorite directors, Sam Fuller. Sam Fuller is an American genius who is underappreciated. I think in his time he was appreciated, but and even then he was kind of on the outskirts. But he's somebody who I have loved for so long. Listeners, I'll put them in the show notes. Earlier this year, I talked about Sam Fuller's war films with some friends in the UK. And then my pals, Mackenzie and Ian over at the Criterion Connection, we talked 40 Guns. I talk about Sam Fuller as much as I can. The reason that we had both Mike and Spencer on this episode is this is a bit of a companion episode to last year's Noirvember. Over on Mike's feed, over at the projection booth, we covered The Naked Kiss, which is actually probably my favorite Sam Fuller film. I love all of his films. I think there's only one film of his that I don't like, and it's kind of one that he himself kind of disowned and took his name off, saying, hey, they kind of took it away from me and it's not even my movie. So for me, there's not really a bad Sam Fuller movie, but last year we covered The Naked Kiss. I think it's an incredible movie, as is the one we're talking about here today. And after you listen to this episode, you should go check out that one. One of the cool things about the episode we did last year was Mike actually landed interviews. I don't know how he did this, but Mike landed interviews with Constance Towers and Michael Dante, stars of The Naked Kiss, both over 90 years old. And Constance Towers also here in Shot Corridor. So I don't know if you're folks who have watched the movie beforehand. I highly recommend it. We're going to be talking spoilers, getting into everything. It's a very old film, but it's definitely one. And you can watch it. Some people like to know what they're getting into before they watch it. But if that's something that's important to you, pause it, go check it out. It's currently streaming on the Criterion channel, and I also believe there is a pretty good version up on archive.org. If there's a good archive version, I will put that in the show notes as well. So if you want to pause it now, check out the show notes, find it there. I will try to do that for you guys as well. Similar to the John Guerra episode we had last week, this one deals with America's psychoses and the things that make her crazy. Wasn't trying to hold it for this reason, but here we are in the week after the election, talking Shot Corridor, a very crass and unsubtle picture of America as a mental asylum and the things that plague her. So kind of a perfect movie. Again, didn't intend it, just kind of the way things go. So hope you guys enjoyed this movie. And before I kick right to the conversation here with Mike and Spencer, I also wanted to give a shout out to Imprint. They've sent us some Blu-rays here over the last few months. Recently here for spooky season, we got Black Moon and the Queen of Spades. I won't say a ton about Black Moon. Friend of the show, Elliot Cohen, on his YouTube page. His thoughts, I would definitely echo. In a way, I'm glad that Black Moon, we still have it. Like, as a historical document, I'm always for preserving film, but I didn't find a ton to love about that one, but I'm very excited to check out the Queen of Spades. So thank you, Imprint, for those. We look forward to hopefully giving you guys more coverage on that. So we appreciate that very much. And without further ado, here is our episode on Sam Fuller's Shock Corridor. All right, Mike and Spencer, welcome to The Substance. Mike, welcome back.
So good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been quite a while.
Yeah, it was making me a little crazy that I haven't been back lately.
Well, now we're doing substantive cinemas more often. The door is always open if we find something that makes sense. You were one of, and I don't mind telling you that I feel like you were one of our first like bigger gets, and I felt great because I was like, I talked to this guy on social media. I feel like the thing is a softball, and you were very kind and gracious, and we hit it off, and you've invited me on. We've had some wonderful times on your show as well, so it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Very glad to be back. Thank you so much.
And Spencer, welcome to The Substance. This is your first time. I'm very excited for this conversation as a follow up and a companion to our conversation a couple years ago about the Naked Kiss over at the projection booth.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's always a good time talking about Sam Fuller.
It is, isn't it?
Especially these two movies.
It is true. So, I mean, listeners may know, I'm not sure exactly when this episode will release, but it's been a bit of it kind of always is a Sam Fuller year for me, honestly, but have had the pleasure to guest on shows for internet friends around the world. So I've been watching a lot. I've been watching a lot of Sam Fuller movies and reading his book kind of on purpose to study. And these two are two of my three favorites. So this is like very special ground for me. So, Mike, let's get right into it. As a precursor to the Naked Kiss, listeners definitely go check out the projection booth episode on the Naked Kiss. That's genuinely one of, I feel like, the things in my podcast repertoire that I'm the most proud of. Just because, man, you stuck it out and you got Constance Towers on the show, which is incredible. I went back and listened to it, and that was a great conversation.
And had I known, I would have asked her some more questions about Shock Corridor too, and just offer those up to you because yeah, this 1-2 punch from Fuller was just amazing, and it's so nice that she was so involved with both of these films. I mean, of course, Naked Kiss is such a showcase for her, but no slouch in Shock Corridor either.
Oh no, not at all. You can see why her role was not like screen time. She didn't get a lot of time, but she was like the emotional anchor point of this, and you could see why when all the stuff in his head came together for the Naked Kiss, that it's like, oh, like he had just worked. She's like, oh, this is perfect for her.
Yeah, and we go from incest to child molestation. Oh my God.
Yeah, Sam Fuller was a bit of a like, I don't like it when people call him a provocateur. I don't think that's exactly appropriate, but he what's the right way to put it? Yeah, he really just trafficked in the human, like
Yeah.
the good, the bad, and the ugly. He didn't care, and I think he did get a little bit of perverse joy out of pressing buttons and riling people up, but it was not to no end. It wasn't like some of these directors who we may not name who just like to have a controversy for the sake of having a controversy. He really cared about the humanity underneath it and the societal ills that created some of these problems to begin with.
Well, so much of it for me is coming from his whole tabloid background. And so much, I mean, our main character in this movie is a writer who wants to win the Pulitzer. So it just feels like it's probably somebody that Fuller worked with before, or somebody who's just so power mad or like fame mad. And he's just like, oh, all right, I'll pull that from real life and put that as my main character here.
Or I mean, go for it, Spencer.
Well, one thing that's really great in Shock Corridor is the way in which all the sympathy is really given to all the characters on the lowest class rungs of the world here. The patients, and then the moral center of the movie is Constance Towers. Really, she's from the very get go, in the very first scene out of the gate. She is sort of she's calling everyone on their bullshit, and the way that the the newspaper has a kind of like social respectability and a purpose, and we're going to change the world, we're going to make things better. And there may be these intentions, but a lot of it is sort of classist and power hungry and manipulative. And you know, yeah, one of the things that's so fascinating to me about this story is is the way in which it's like it's set up as a lie down with dogs, rise with fleas, kind of narrative. But the big thing is that the protagonist, he really hurts the people that he comes in contact with, and so there's something here where on one level we can constantly see that the conflict between how he means well and the sort of Pulitzer ambitions or whatever, but in the end he's really tormenting the other people that he's coming into contact with for whatever his like lofty aims may be.
Very much so. So, listeners, if this is not a film you've seen before, let me read the synopsis here. The Letterboxd synopsis reads: with the help of his girlfriend Kathy and Dr. Fong, a psychiatrist, ambitious journalist Johnny Barrett poses as a madman in order to be admitted to a mental institution where a bloody murder has been committed. So yeah, and that's a very like tabloid premise to begin with, like a little Pulp Fiction novel. Like I know Sam Fuller wrote several of those. Like that's like in my mind back in the day, you walk into an executive's office, you're like, here's a story. Like reporter pretends to be crazy to go solve a murder in an asylum. Like that's a good hook.
Yeah, so it's like he dives into this particular world to win with the idea of winning a Pulitzer Prize over discovering who committed this murder. But ultimately the murder and the solving of it is like sub MacGuffin.
Mhm.
It really truly, like, it's not that he blows the lid off of some corruption within this space that would affect things in any kind of systemic way, and then he's presented with the life stories of these patients who appear to be like the treatment appears not to be very effective
Right.
for any of these patients, and that this reporter blunders into eliciting things from them that it seems like the doctors should be trying to wrestle with, but maybe they're not, and that would appear to be a more worthy kind of Pulitzer Prize winning story than this. Obviously no murder is unimportant, but within this particular story, the murder is not really about the system and the society that we're presented with. It is he like solves a kind of one-off event within this world that is much more seriously fucked up than a single murder.
Absolutely. So I mean, it's kind of hard because you're like, there's so many ideas here that are great, and there's so much good food for thought, and then there's also the structure. So, yeah, so there's a lot of good ideas here that I want to get to. But one of the things you guys have both mentioned it. So at the beginning of this film, he's talking about his ambitions, and it's throughout the film to win a Pulitzer. And I just thought it was funny because, like I said, I've been on a bit of a Sam Fuller kick lately. I tracked down and watched his episode of The Virginian, and I recently watched Park Row. Like Pulitzer is in so much of Sam Fuller's work. Like,
Yeah.
and I know that Sam Fuller, like his first life was a journalist, and that's how. And we talked about that in The Naked Kiss. Like a lot of the germs of that idea came from his work as a reporter, and this one very clearly, like probably some colleagues and maybe even a little bit of him. Like Sam Fuller, part of the reason he joined the army and joined the infantry was to like get stories to tell. And
Mhm.
that's where he kind of, not kind of, that's where he lost his innocence, and his famous quote of like, once you kill a man, anyone else you kill like in the future, like you're just killing the same guy over and over, and like being haunted by that. And it was war, and it wasn't like he was like a murderer, but he, like the whole taking of a life. And I recently watched 40 Guns, like the climax of that movie where the hero's life is saved, but how somber and serious that moment was when the guy who saved his life, like he was expecting thanks, and the hero just is clearly like unhappy, and he's like, what, like, I saved your life. He goes, no, you killed a man. And
Right.
like,
Mm.
and Sam Fuller went on that path in order to get stories to tell, and that, like, the violence and like the male heroism and like the American myth of like the good guy with a gun and right by might, like that is always stuff Fuller is coming after and dismantling, and in some ways like the journalistic side of that, he does that here.
Yeah, and there's there's a similar moment that just uh, kills me. The first time I got to see the Big Red One was in a theater,
Oh boy.
which was kind of a lucky
Wow.
occurrence because a lot of people, it was the restored version that
Sure.
with a little bit more stuff and everything. And
Mhm.
I actually, when I've seen both cuts, I kind of like the original cut a little bit more. It's a little less rangy and whatnot. But just getting to see it in the theater is an incredible experience. And the Mark Hamill character's journey in that movie, and when he's confronted with uh, you know when he's confronted with a concentration camp at the end, and he finally is moved to violence. We see that the violence has ruined him.
Mhm.
So at once, he is walking into the most obscene kind of environment that you could imagine, the thing that would make one pick up the gun in righteous anger, and it totally ruins the character. The righteous anger can't rescue. The whole thing is a kind of moral ruination, and that's something that I think runs throughout Fuller's work. In that for instance in Shot Corridor, I think comes through in real suspicion of authority, real suspicion of different kinds of class, upper class to lower class kind of relationships. And it's not that the journalists are particularly upper class, but within privilege and power, they have so much more power than the patients within this asylum. And similarly, the doctors are not really to be trusted. One of the things that comes up in the reviews is like, why don't the doctors pick this guy out? That's preposterous and ridiculous. And it's kind of like, um, no, Fuller here is voting no confidence
Right.
in this kind of medical structure. That is key to the plot, is that the doctors can be tricked, and that they are not very successful at treating their patients.
I'm looking for the date here. I can't find it immediately. Maybe I'll cut this out. But have either of you guys seen the film he wrote, The Power of the Press?
I have not.
No,
No.
I haven't seen that one. I've seen Park Row.
Park Row. So yeah, it's interesting. That's what I was going to kind of say. We're going to try to keep it here. Shot Quarter. Sam Fuller's obviously already in modern times a pretty underseen director, so I'm not trying to get real obscure here. So that was Power of the Press was a very early one he wrote, like before anybody would let him go near the director's chair. But that was, it's almost like quaint, but it's so sweet and so idealistic, and it's interesting to see. And it's like 65 minutes also. So it's
Mhm.
interesting to see Power of the Press to Park Row to Shot Corridor. And I feel like a lot of people also mistakenly, in my view, call him cynical. But I think as he got older, he just had no problem identifying the problems,
Yeah.
and in a hopeful way, in a very humanistic and hopeful way, he would attack these problems. Like one of his like final movie, like his final big movie, it's maybe not his best, but White Dog, like that is just clearly like
Mm.
a very on its face parable. And he got to do it like it's an adaptation of a book, but like that was the stuff he was drawn to. But he wanted to tackle problems, and it's so interesting. Like in the hands of a lesser talented person, these films would be like nonsense.
Oh
These
God,
would be
yeah.
like bad sermons. Like he obviously cares about principles and ideas. And in a way, like you read his book and his memoirs and listen to his interviews, like he wanted to teach in a way and impart wisdom and ideals in a way, but it wasn't like, hey, go to Shot Corridor to learn a lesson. It's like, no, go for this exciting, entertaining, like lurid, pulpy, fun story. But then also within that structure, there's a lot of substance.
Well, I think it's telling that he quotes from Euripides. This is on the one level, it's a kind of move for Greek tragedy and legitimacy for a pulpy kind of story. But actually, Euripides is very much a kind of spiritual companion to Fuller. He is like in the school of Euripides in sort of approaching problems that ultimately within the drama are not solvable, versus the other Greek tragedy guys like Sophocles or Aeschylus. You have something closer to a coherent lesson there. But I think what makes Fuller so wonderful is that he's taking on very distinct different kinds of points of view and crashing them against each other in ways that can at once stand up for principles, but then also see how principles come up against one another within a society, and that some of this is not quite solvable, but nevertheless the effort made to work through it is important. And I think, yeah, Shot Corridor is very much a Euripides style, kind of thing. Like Aristotle did not. I'm sorry to go off on this, but I can't help myself. Aristotle didn't like Euripides as much because, like, he'd use Deus Ex Machina, and like Medea just comes and kills the children and then rides away with dragons at
but
the
it's
end.
exciting. It's emotional.
Yeah, exactly. But it's exciting and it's emotional, and it's also a recognition that like the problems cannot just be solved through a reasonable process, of going to court, for instance, like in the Oresteia, or solving the mystery in Oedipus. You have this other kind of thing that is a clash of emotions and moralities. And I think that's very, it's very well chosen and exactly right. Even to pull, maybe Fuller didn't know Euripides at all and was just pulling the most famous quote. Totally possible. Wouldn't put it past him. But at the same time, boy, he knew. He was like right on the path. That's his lineage.
To have the audacity to quote it at the beginning and the end.
And the end.
I know. Yes. It bookended it.
So good.
As if we didn't get it the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
And he did, like, seeing more of his work in a condensed amount of space. Like, he did that. Like, we mentioned that on The Naked Kiss, how I believe was in The Run of the Arrow. And so now going back and rewatching The Steel Helmet, at the end of The Steel Helmet, he did it kind of generally, like, we all need to do better. And then at The Run of the Arrow, he goes, you, people watching this movie, you make it better.
Right.
So, like,
maybe I didn't have my point come across before. Let me really spell it out for you.
Exactly. So you mentioned, like, so the murder, that is ostensibly what is driving the train of this movie, and kind of very conveniently, and in a story structure, there's a nice little 3-act structure. There were 3 witnesses to the murder, and he goes at them 1, 2, 3, and each in a very both very clear way, but it doesn't come off as corny, or very clear representations of, like, ills of American society. So, like, the whole overarching thing can be a comment on both, and we can talk about these at any time, like the journalism thing that you already brought up. Like, he believed in a free press, and that journalism, holding the powerful accountable, is good, but also the 2 main ills of that he deals with in a number of things are, like, some of the people in journalism can just be out to make money, and the people running the press can just be like powering themselves, like using it to power themselves. But he still believed it was important. Like, he was an idealist. And then, like, the American mental health crisis in general. So those are the 2 kind of overarching things. But the 3 witnesses and their ailments are very, very clear parallels to the ills of America.
Yeah. Well, and none of those ills of America are, again, easily solvable.
Well, I mean, 1963 to 2024, it was like, the last time I watched this, it was post 2020, but I feel like it did not hit as hard as it did this week when I watched it.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, there's in the first interview, there's the turn where, because and this
So
sort of
yeah,
an
you want to
interesting.
describe Mike or Spencer? You want to describe like the nationalist guy, the guy who thinks he's the general?
Yeah, so like with the first guy, who I'll just mention briefly because we got to come back to this again later, is an obvious influence on Ben Horn in season 2 of Twin Peaks,
Oh,
believing
totally.
that he's a Civil War general.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Direct, absolute steal. There's no question whatsoever about that influence. But so he's sort of in this weird historic regression that is also obviously played as racist, before we're then going to deal with the
Yeah,
second.
it's maybe more like the nationalist, because
Yeah,
Fuller all the time, both as a newspaperman and then as a soldier, was like people just equating, like in the press being like, oh, France is this, Germany's that, Japan is that,
yes,
like leveling a people to one thing, and it's good or bad. And then in America you have that fracture of, we're supposed to be one nation, and then we have these two factions, which, I
that
mean, the last
Well,
couple years that's been.
it's interesting too that there's the whole thing with the North and the South and him being the Southern general, or
yeah,
thinking that he is, and then that he left. This is like one of the first, and I love that Fuller was all about showing wars that weren't necessarily popular wars. So this was the
right.
Korean War, and he went from South Korea to North Korea. So I think that's definitely a parallel in there. And then he goes over to North Korea and basically gets brainwashed by the communists. And this was his mental fracturing and way to deal with that brainwashing, to have this new personality where he thinks that he's this Southern general. I thought that was really smart.
Well, and I think the approach to the idea of brainwashing here, I think, makes an interesting comparison with Manchurian Candidate,
Oh, big time.
from around the same time. But it's a really radical move that Fuller pulls by using his B movie premise to humanize the idea of going over to being brainwashed, and willingly
Yeah,
being
very
brainwashed
much.
by the communists, because of coming from a really racist and kind of, I don't like the word toxic very much, but it's the one at the top of my mind. This sort of toxic environment that he's come from makes him ready to be brainwashed by communists when he's captured
Which
in
is
North
not
Korea.
a relevant theme at all nowadays, thankfully, right?
Yeah, so really fascinating that he's doing that, and I find it interesting in reading reviews from the period that nobody freaks out over this, because I'm like, wait, there's a whole very strong Red Scare still going on in America at this time, and here Fuller is really giving a lot of sympathy, in an ideological turn to somebody, and then also giving the sympathy of why returning to America under these conditions would drive somebody, into severe manifestations of mental illness. Um, it's really quite remarkable, and it's one of those things that every time I watch this movie, that particular scene, and I think Fuller on a certain level, feels the most, feels the closest to this character, through having been a soldier through the wartime experience. There's something that I think is especially intense in the experience of this first guy that we meet and go through. It is a lot more moving than I remotely expect. Every time that I watch this film, I am not prepared for just like how upset this like monologue is about to make me. It's
Oh,
No,
like
that
part of
is.
the way through, I am wrecked.
Yeah,
oh,
and
that
it's
is that is
it's
Harry Rose's monologue for me. Oh
It
my god,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I, not to take us off track, but I had a hard time at times kind of keeping Peter Breck and James Best apart. They look so similar to me. Is that just me? Is that me? I mean, I'm familiar with James Best. I mean, I grew up watching Dukes of Hazzard, so I know this guy. But those two guys are so similar to me, and I almost wonder if that was a choice.
That's interesting.
Could be. I mean, I've had that sometimes, especially when it's black and white and the uniforms basically in the institution are all kind of leveled, and most people are looking pretty similar. That could be. But no, I am with you, Spencer. That one was that hit me really hard. And I mean, and again, it's a testament to both his acting skills, but also Fuller's writing, that the stuff he's saying sounds, again, in if it was a lesser writer or a lesser
Yeah.
performer. He talks about, when I was a kid, my parents fed me bigotry for breakfast and
Yeah.
ignorance for supper. Like that
Yes.
is that is a 12 out of 10 pulp line.
Oh
but
yeah.
but it lands, and it pierces you, because you're like, yeah, when people have, like, their intake is bigotry and ignorance, like, one, like, they will be like very poor contributors to society, but then that also leaves them very vulnerable to all sorts of things. And then when their worldview falls apart, like, they either turn to something like powerful and wicked, or they can just fall apart.
Yeah, and there's, this sets up the way that the plot is going to go the rest of the time, but there's something kind of obscene in the reaction of Johnny listening to this and then going, "Okay, but you got to tell me who killed that guy."
Right.
I'm like, how do you listen to this and not like want to really engage with this person on his level, and instead,
You wanted that
just
Pulitzer.
yeah, just got to go for that Pulitzer, which
Uh-huh.
of course is part of what shuts him down and puts him back in the place of being the imaginary Civil War general. But I do also think, and this is something I want to talk about later. I also wonder about the I no, Fuller is not at all a meta kind of dramatist, but
No.
there is a level of this movie in particular that I find to take on an unreliable narrator quality, where I am not totally sure what reality is after a certain point. I
True.
am not sure where Johnny is in, and I think that's I do think it's at least partly intentional. We're leading up to a point where Johnny's almost gonna drown in a downpour in the shock corridor, which then reminds him that he's got to go to the water therapy room to find the guy. But at any rate, we're definitely dealing in a world where it's to me unclear what the reality is for him, even at this fairly early point in the film. Never mind, like, once we get to two more people and like the solution to the mystery, in scare quotes.
Well, yeah. So he gets one clue. He gets the white pants from our first guy.
Right.
And then, man, as soon as the introduction of our second eyewitness with the sign, you're just like,
Wow.
yikes.
Yeah, nobody's touching that one now. But it's this is like one of those things where we talked about this with Naked Kiss, but this is where I think Fuller is so valuable, is in showing how directness and actually hitting third rails is a means of being a virtuous storyteller for the
Yes,
audience.
being truthful and virtuous through these things. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys know. I was tempted. I am 99.9% not going to do it, but we always take a little bit of audio at the beginning to introduce the show, kind of give the listeners a flavor of the movie. I was like, should I get some audio from the second one? I was like, no, that's
Ooh.
maybe that's
No,
maybe a little bit much.
maybe
I
a
think
bit
that's a
much.
definite no.
I mean,
But
but how smart is that? How smart is that to take that rhetoric
exactly.
of white racists and put it into the mouth of an African American actor? I mean, that's just so. I mean, that's Fuller, man. He's so ballsy, and just to be like, okay, yeah, let's do this. You really want to hear how this sounds coming out of somebody else's mouth? let's do this. Let's show what this is like, and it just guts you every single time.
Well, and
Well, and
because
also gives the lie to the desire to make black people like white people.
Yes.
Like, because that's part of the that's part of the psychotic fantasy that's being enacted, is like, what this man is supposed to aspire to is being white. All right, then how ridiculous is that under these circumstances?
yeah, it's a commentary on like what is sanity.
Yeah.
Like you hear this character, this black character is in an asylum spouting this hateful rhetoric, and you're like, man, okay, this guy's crazy. But the subversion of that is that he is saying what was said at that time by white men in power. So I'm sure you guys may know this already, but Fuller didn't write those speeches. He got them from the newspaper, from senators and
Oh my
from
God.
local politicians who were, so that character, I forget his name right now, but the character's name, the first name is a lift from um, the first black student in one particular city to attend, like when in this one university in the city. I forget which city it is. I apologize. Listeners, look that up. Send me an email if you want. But so the first black student to go to college when things were desegregated, all the things that he said were things that were like in the paper and on the radio, and that like the local representatives of like that real historical American place. And Fuller just lifted those and put those in his mouth, and you're just appalled. It is it is that is shocking. That is the most shocking thing I feel like in this movie, and it's harsh. It's hard to
Oh
hear.
yeah. Hmm.
Well, and there's also the so so that is shocking, and then the behavior that's given to him is also shocking, again, within this economy of, why shouldn't black people behave more like white people, and that puts them then pitted against black people. So he's constantly attacking, other African Americans within
Yeah,
the
the one
asylum,
other
spotting them
guy.
and going,
Yeah.
Yeah,
one other
yeah.
guy, and it's
He
like,
might marry my
you're
daughter.
he might marry my daughter. Yeah, it's like,
Oh,
I mean, it's really wild. Again, this goes to the unreliability and, to even a kind of absurdity that that Fuller is working with, where um, there's you don't have a clear lesson that can come out of this. The lesson is in the audience trying to process something that is presented that is so contradictory and absurd, and offensive and kind of wrong from many different angles at the same time. That is a different kind of thing from talking this guy down from his, from his false consciousness, if you will.
Well, and millennial listeners may recognize, I mean, the first thing I thought about the first time I saw this, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, was the Chappelle Show, which I
oh
don't know if
yes,
it was a
yes.
direct, but like the black white supremacist was, I believe, in the pilot episode of Chappelle Show. And it's a great sketch. It's very funny. But here is like, no, but if that was real, because like the sketch is funny and like you can maybe kind of get, oh, like racism's silly, but here you're like, he's hurling the
Yeah.
most, I mean, not just the use of the N-word, but just like the clearly stated propositions of hate and
Yeah.
supremacy. And like it really was about, because he talked about like white supremacy,
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
very, so it wasn't just
White America.
racism. It's
Yeah.
not just we hate black folks. It is
Right.
white supremacy, which is what it actually is. Because
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I feel like some of the very well-meaning people who talk about racism, like, definitely keep going, great work, keep it up, try to learn, but like can be like that can sometimes deter from like, it's not just about people's feelings, it is
Yeah.
about systems of hierarchy and supremacy that harm people beyond just, I don't like people that look a certain way.
Hmm.
Well, and I think that this movie, visually and structurally is an enormous influence on Do the Right Thing. The ways in which the characters in that on one street during a
Sure.
day kind of represent different points within a social structure that is failing, and the way that they're put up against each other, the kind of again, even a choral structure, and then a thing that Spike Lee pulls from Fuller, which is that many other filmmakers following Fuller also pull, is this really punchy directness, a very like right up there in your face kind of statement that I think it actually took a generation of filmmakers after Fuller to sort of you know. Educate an audience, frankly, to how to understand this stuff, because at the time this work was not appreciated, and was seen as similarly to the way that sometimes people have reacted to Spike Lee or other Fuller inflected political work since. The initial reaction is to kind of recoil and go, oh, this is also obvious that Fuller's just making his political points here. And it's interesting to me because what I want to say to somebody like that, as I also want to say to somebody following a viewing of a complicated movie like Do the Right Thing, is okay. So what exactly are those points, and who wins, and how does this come out? And like, are we seeing are we really seeing just political points made, or are we seeing a structure in which different figures making these political points are put into conflict with one another? And what precisely are you supposed to take away from that conflict, other than a sense of, I have to deal with this?
You're
That is
talking
a
about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, just a aside real quickly. That is really good, Spencer. I am woefully undereducated in Spike Lee. I've seen a few of the big ones, and I esteem him highly, but he is not one that I think of in the lineage and disciple of Sam Fuller. But you just saying that, I'm like, oh no, of course, of course.
Spencer, you're talking about how this was received in the day, and
Yeah.
oh my God! Before we started recording, talking about some of the reviews at the time, let me just quote a little bit of Judith Crist from the New York
Oh,
Herald.
Judith Crist is gnarly.
I suspect Samuel Fuller, who wrote, directed, and produced this minor monstrosity, originally intended to come up with the Three Stooges in the loony bin. But Curly, Larry, and Moe, those models of decorum, taste, and subtlety, would have found the script a bit on the wild side. So Mr. Fuller apparently decided to add sex and social significance and found himself a passel of folks whose talent matches their taste, and going along with this with this gag. And gag is the word. Oh boy.
Oh, clever, clever. Those reviewers
Oh,
do love their little plays on words.
oh man, oh man. The reviews at the time were, yes, unkind. Uh, we were saying, like, to look back at something that I think the three of us all consider this a classic, as do many other people, and just read the vitriol that was being thrown at this film. It's amazing.
Well, and
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, this is one that we obviously love. I revisit it and I love sharing it with people. And I mean, I discovered Fuller's work and this movie because of the Criterion Collection. This was spine number 19 in the
Right.
collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I will agree with the reviewer who does not like Daniel Klaus's cover art for this, but I it's okay. It's a choice.
Okay.
It's not the choice I would have gone with. I like Daniel Klaus's work, but I
Sure.
just don't think that it fits with this as well as some of the. I mean, but Criterion and I, we've not been agreeing about cover art for quite a while now.
There have been
I'll
a few
agree though
great
in this.
ones, but
Oh,
man, there have been a few great ones lately, but it's been a bit of a desert.
Mhm.
I will say though that Daniel Klaus, I think, is immensely influenced by Sam Fuller.
Oh,
So
for
on
sure.
that level,
Oh.
this makes perfect sense.
I think his Naked Kiss one is more appropriate.
I
Yeah, yeah.
agree. I like the idea of like the little stripper in the middle of his forehead
Yes.
there. That's kind of
Yeah.
neat. Like it took me a long time to realize that that's what that was. I just was seeing it from a distance, and I'm like, what is that on his forehead? And then finally I was like, oh, that's Constant Towers. Okay, cool. That's
Well,
Kathy
so
right there.
that's one of the elements, and this is a very Fuller kind of thing, but that's one of the elements of this where I watch and I just go like, oh, why are so many of us filmmakers, myself included, so uptight? Because like that is on the one hand bonkers and like, no, 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 don't follow that idea. And on the other hand, it's like, why the hell not? It is very direct. It's actually it's amazing. Yeah, I know it's Sam Fuller. He's great, so he can make it work. But it's also like, more of us could get closer to being Sam Fuller if we would just like cut loose for a change. I watch the moment where Constance Towers is like, going like dancing around on his chest while he's in delirium.
So funny when she's like
And
tickling his ear. I like cackled.
It's
oh,
so
it's
good.
amazing. It's no more cinema should be like this.
Yes.
Like let that bad idea through. This is also a thing about Fuller is that he is like he's a window on a kind of vulgar pre-camp sort of tradition of storytelling
Yes.
where it's not like camp where you're deliberately going into bad taste. It's this kind of pre-camp thing of I want to keep the audience engaged, I want them entertained, and I will do anything for it.
Well,
It's
yeah,
a
you
kind
can.
of vaudeville sensibility.
Yeah,
It's
you
great.
can. I much prefer, and I'm much more friendly to people calling him a bit of an exploitation filmmaker than like
Absolutely.
a provocateur, because it is like like an aside before we get to the third and final eyewitness. You mentioned Constance Towers in the illustration. So in Shot Corridor, she's a stripper, and in The
Of
Naked
course.
Kiss, she's a prostitute. And in both
Right.
movies, she is the moral center. Sam
Yep.
Fuller, again, with the subversive take that went back to his days as a reporter and actually covering vice and covering murder.
Mm-hmm.
He saw these women who did what they had to do to get by because of the broken systems of um, the class system, of the rich oppressing the poor, of patriarchy oppressing women, like women doing what they needed to do to try to get a leg up and to take care of themselves. And Constance Towers in both of these, it's not salacious. And even like the one scene where she like does a dance a little bit, like you don't even see her belly button. Like it's not like, ooh, look at this sexy woman. It's this type of thing that people exploit and people like to use and prey upon. Like these are people who in a lot of ways are forced into those roles by these systems that we never really think about other than just abject condemnation in America.
Mhm.
And yet Fuller also does utterly bizarre stuff with her in both movies. Like she is responsible in both of these films for just like mind-bending moments. Obviously the opening of The Naked
Oh,
Kiss where the wig comes
historic,
off and
one
she's
of the
bald,
greatest in
but
the world.
Oh
the
yeah.
beginning of her act in
Oh
Shot
God.
Corridor
That is
with the
so
feather
Lynchian. That is
boa
just, you can't see
all
her face.
wrapped around
Yeah.
her
Oh,
face and just
so
this
good.
little like moving part of it from her breath as she's singing through this feather boa.
That's
And
a Twin Peaks The Return shot right there.
Oh
absolutely, it's
man.
Twin Peaks: The Returns. It's like Velvet Glove cast in iron. It's like one of the cantina creatures in Star Wars. I mean, it's like this one image you can trace to so many other things, and it is such a wonderful, incredible, bizarre kind of thing to give to the audience and continue to humanize her throughout.
Well, if memory serves, that whole striptease number, which has like some other crazy moments in there as well, it's all a oneer, right? It's all just,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, he
it's
had a couple of
amazing.
those.
Yeah, I love that. And I love those hearts behind her that's going on. And just, yeah, the framing of her. We are so far away. We hear the audience, but we never actually see the audience. And then I love this whole thing, too. Like we were talking about Naked Kiss, you've got kind of these groups of women in here. You've got all of the women who are in front of their dressing tables, and I love that Sam has his
The
cameo
Sam Fuller
there.
cameo.
It's so nice
Yeah.
because they remind
All
me
of
of
them have their boyfriends, and then the girl
Yes.
on the end's got a big old Sam Fuller cheesing with a cigar in his mouth.
Well, they so remind me of all the gals at Candy's place across the river,
Right.
you know. And then it's interesting that you've got that group of women in this place in the strip club, and then you've got the nymphos and the and I love that they just call them nymphos. The nymphos in the ward, which was such a
That's
shocking
maybe what has
scene
aged the worst.
every single reviewer always had to bring up those nymphos and just the attack of the nymphos. And I'm like, all right, I think there's some wishful thinking there.
That was maybe the most emptily salacious bit. Because you're like, what even was that?
I mean, it is, but it's also like, again, to the everlasting influence, this is the scene that like George Romero is drawing on for the zombie feast. Then from Romero onward, we have all these zombies, and then the way in which they're kind of they're singing "My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean" and everything. God. This is also very Lynchian. This is like Blue Velvet kind of stuff. It's also extremely John Waters. I mean, like just the moment of like in his voiceover, nymphos, and the way that they're approaching him. It is. I mean, I cannot fully endorse this, but there is actually like an incredible nightmare vision going on in this, and I cannot resolve it with the sexuality of the rest of the movie. But it does feel like. It feels like a necessary tangent in a very sexually hopped up film.
Well, I think Mike's point, I mean, if you have more, feel free to take it home. But I do love that, like the parallels of those two groups.
Well, I was just thinking of another parallel. You know, I was talking about James Best and this whole North-South thing that's going on with him.
Right.
I was just thinking that he's brainwashed by Koreans. And then you think about Johnny at the beginning of the movie. I was so happy to see Philip Ahn in this film because I was a big kung fu guy, right? The blind master for Kane. Well, he's a Korean American actor, and he's the one that's coaching Johnny. He's almost in that same position, you know?
I did not make that connection.
I didn't until just now.
And that also brings us close to Manchurian Candidate country. And Manchurian Candidate is another nightmare film where you can pull out all kinds of political valences, and you could even say it's politically blunt. But in the end, is it really that politically blunt when you cannot resolve the conflicts in it? And somebody could say, oh, well, that's just bad dramaturgy. But again, I'm going to go back to Euripides and say, like, no, there is a tradition of not resolving this stuff because the resolution is maybe left to the audience, because politics is taken out by the audience, by people in the real world. Politics is, maybe part of art, but is not at its most effective through art. It's our job, not the artist's job, to sort of tidily wrap things up and then leave us feeling better at the end. Like certainly in this movie, Fuller doesn't do that, and I think in Naked Kiss, even with a happier ending in that movie, he does not leave it as something that like, he did his job so that we can feel better. We got to get out there and do something. And that's actually what he in one of his interviews he said was a purpose for him, was
absolutely.
Like,
and he couldn't help himself. Like in a couple of his movies, like we said, literally the title card at the end is like, "Hey guys, get to it.
Your time. Come on, let's go."
Yeah, he's kind of a vulgar Brechtian. Like I doubt he ever read any Brecht, but he's doing it.
I love that. I love Sam Fuller, the vulgar Brechtian. That's so great, Spencer.
Well, and obviously, and like a non-vulgar Brechtian would be Paul Verhoeven, but Verhoeven is also, like one of the many sons of Fuller.
Yeah, not literally. I mean, like the whole like
I
I
mean,
loved that time in the 90s when we were getting filmmakers openly embracing Sam Fuller, the
yes.
whole Tigrero thing with the
Yep.
Kaurismäki brothers. And then, I mean, of course, Jim Jarmusch
Jarmusch,
just
yep.
being, yeah, such a huge advocate. I mean, that whole, what was it, the rifle, the camera, and the typewriter
Yep.
Yep.
documentary?
That's on the
Wow. I mean,
Criterion disc of this, which was
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
And
I
then,
was really
yeah,
glad when they put that out because there was, people didn't, I didn't know. Obviously, I went through film school. I never got shown a Sam Fuller film. It wasn't until afterwards,
criminal.
back when AMC
Back
was
when it
more
was
like TCM.
hard, back when it was
Yes.
Yeah.
hard to see that crap.
Oh
Yeah.
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 Oh, it was really tough to track down a lot of these films. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I lied. They showed me Run of the Arrow in college. That was the only Fuller that I saw. But thank God they showed that because speaking of hard to find films, that one was just incredibly difficult for so many years. So many of these films were so tough to find. And when they brought out the 1-2 punch of Naked Kiss and Shot Quarter on VHS,
Hmm.
that was a life changer for a
That's
lot of
kind of
people.
what reintroduced him to the public at that time, which is great because now there's really only one of his films. I mean, there's like two or three that are hard to find, but there's only one of his films that's like unavailable currently, and it's his latest movie, so we should be able to get it. I every now and then I email Jennifer Beals and her people, whatever info I can find, and be like, please, can we get a copy of it?
Which one are you talking about? Are you
The
talking about
Madonna and the Dragon.
oh yeah, yeah. No, that is I want to say there might be a copy floating around,
The
but
If you see a link or something, shoot it to me.
all
But
right.
Oh
I
man.
have looked far and wide, and the one I don't know if it's still live. I'll maybe cut this or throw this at the end of the show. um, but I don't know if you guys have ever ordered from dvdlady.com, which seems to be like
I have.
DVDs that are rips of like bad internet, like 480p type rips of stuff.
Yeah, but sometimes that's all you can get. Yeah,
Yeah.
she had a lot of subtitled oh, why am I blanking on Glauber Rocha films and before. I mean, I'm glad that White Devil, Black God is now finally coming
Oh
out
man,
legit,
yeah, they
but
got a bunch of editions.
oh
I'm
yeah.
excited. Now I'm trying to decide, do I want to go Radiance or Criterion? Now we get
Yeah,
options.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
Well,
no,
back.
my
I'll tell you
generation is
who's
very privileged in that
I'll
way.
tell you who's spending money on extras, and that's Radiance. So
Yeah,
it's
no,
not Criterion unless they can
No.
license it from
love
somebody else for cheap. They're
I
not
love
Yeah.
doing it.
supporting Radiance. I
Oh
just
yeah,
got a couple of packages from them, and I got some more coming. I'm very excited.
Well, back to the
Anyway,
film
sidebar.
school
Yeah.
thing.
So the last
Yeah.
film school. Okay.
Back to the film school thing, and I will I'll speak here as part of the problem being a film school teacher, but it's actually it's interesting because my film school experience was back in the late '90s, and a little bit shame on it, but at the same time I had parallel film experiences. One of them was the experience of my classes where we got no Sam Fuller. The other experience was the kind of social Austin, Texas experience where there was definitely a Sam Fuller cult in Austin. Rick Linklater and Robert
I was
Rodriguez
just at
and
the Austin Film Society about a week ago, and it was beautiful.
exactly, and Lewis Black and like all this crowd of big Fuller fans in Austin. So got exposed to Fuller through that. But it's interesting to me that like I look at a movie like this and on so many levels like yeah, there's all kinds of issues of taste and whatnot, but that's also what we should be teaching about. Is not just that there's good taste and bad taste, but that there are just these different deployments of taste that Fuller can represent. But this is a kind of thing that's like really a film school in one disc.
Yeah.
Like watching this blocking and camera work is absolutely incredible. The way that it's all cut and put together, but then also the sense of film history that you get from it, as like I consider it to be among the group of films that show America's post-war crack up, along with like The Searchers and Vertigo, as really responding to how yeah we win World War II and we come back from it so damaged,
Broken. Yeah.
so broken and screwed up. Whether it be in terms of race or sex, or in this case race and sex and class kind of all coming together. So it's a kind of film that just it hits at this certain place in film history where you can see the influences leading up to it and the way that it influences so much coming after it. It's a formal masterpiece of just
It
like,
is.
how do you block and stage all this stuff? It's beautiful and it's simple. The elegance of Fuller's staging and, plan for the editing is really gorgeous. And then there's also, yeah, the directness, the vulgar directness of the dramaturgy of saying the subtext aloud and yet still having room for more subtext coming behind
Yeah,
that.
but it's still landing without going like, oof, like, come on, guy, like
Though
that's too
Judith
much.
Crist would beg
Yeah.
to disagree.
Well, she's welcome to do that. I was gonna say part of the impressive nature is that I rewatched. I've actually watched it several times on the Criterion disc, the Constance Towers interview, where she's still not a young lady in this, but she is so sharp, so vibrant. Talks about they had 10 shooting days and a
Yeah.
couple $100,000. Like I know this is a soapbox I'm on now. I know the reactions to Megalopolis are across the board, but I'm like, look, there needs to be a threshold where once you've made enough great pieces of art, you just get a budget. You get a budget and get left alone. Like,
Yes.
but also I think that limitations can be good
Sure.
because Francis Ford Coppola might even be an example when you have so much of your own money and kind of go nuts. But like Sam Fuller had a few $100,000 in 10 shooting days. They rehearsed the heck out of this for
Yeah.
the staging and the blocking and the script. They had this down pat because they're like, we got 2 shooting weeks. That's
Right,
it.
but I'll tell you from experience, like now, if you get a 10-day shoot, you're generally not getting any rehearsal time. So it like rehearsal time is like one of the things on an independent film that you just cannot get anybody to pay for and anybody to do. It's really, really hard.
It's
You kind of
almost like one of
have to.
those like first you can only do that on your first movie with your friends when you're
Yeah,
doing it
yeah,
like
Yeah.
exactly.
off the
No, no, no,
clock.
precisely. No, the moment that you're like hiring a sort of professional crew and a lot of professional actors, it's like, oh, well, if you really want to pay for all those rehearsal days, and it's like, well, but that's, we can't. So it's really hard. I don't know. I'm always telling my students, you got to carve out the time to rehearse if you possibly can, because it's so important because you're not going to have the shooting
The
days.
pros and cons of the studio system, like just like with cable and streaming, like we're in a
Yeah.
constant loop. Like there were a lot of good, like if we could get the good things about studio filmmaking back, I would love
Yes,
that. But
totally.
you also don't want artists to be exploited. So like there's this push and pull of how does like because it is art and an industry. So how can we like empower the creative people creating this product to have enough freedom and structure? Because like when you had sets and lots and electricians and grips, like you had people who were experts at that you would just plug in, and then your
Yeah.
production would be that much easier and you'd have that much more off your plate. And then you could be like, okay, we got 10 days. And we haven't mentioned this at all yet. The titular corridor is a pretty impressive like
Great
optical
set.
That set
shot.
is amazing. Yeah. And I only noticed the little people
Yeah.
like in one area where they're just going back and forth and back and
Very
forth. And I'm like,
another
oh, that's
very
really cool.
Lynchian touch
Oh,
Yeah.
and a
yeah.
surrealist touch of the corridor that they also call the street, going back to a potential
Right.
Spike Lee parallel there. It is intended to appear to go on infinitely. And
Yeah.
if you look, like there is no end to the corridor, and in the foreground you see people and in the background you see people. As Mike mentioned, yeah, they got little people, dressed them up to be in the back to make it look like that, this illusion of this kind of never-ending thing, which also kind of
Yeah.
is maybe not a commentary but food for thought of like just the American psyche. And then we haven't even gotten to the third problem. We don't want to necessarily spend a ton of time on that, but the third guy was like a nuclear scientist, and you go of
Right.
like the fear of the bomb, the fear of war, the the outworkings on a society that is mired in violence. And I mean, racism, nationalism are very American things, but from the get-go, like violence is very inherent to the DNA of America. And trying to reckon with some of these things. Like this is a major thing that
Yeah.
if we want to make progress, and Sam Fuller, for all of his brashness, his directness, his vulgarity, he was a believer. He believed in a better future, that we could make it better. And
Mm.
in many of his movies, he goes, "Hey guys, make it better."
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
violence
we
is inextricable to the American identity.
Well, it's interesting that the third guy, the nuclear scientist, played by Gene Evans, who I know that Fuller had worked with before, especially on the steel helmet, he kind of gets overshadowed. He's barely in this one. In fact, he's like
Mm.
missing for part of the movie. I wonder if it was a scheduling thing or
I
something.
did wonder that. And it's so funny because in the steel helmet, he embodies that character so strongly. And I just watched Park Row. It took me about 10-15 minutes to realize he was in Park Row. But I noticed him immediately in this, but because he was clean shaven and so
Oh yeah.
childlike in his mental patient persona, it was so funny to go from the steel helmet to this.
Well, it's a really interesting scene that turns around the dynamic a little bit
Hmm.
from the other two. So when we get to the third one, we have this person who is not monologuing so much. It's like all he wants to do is draw another human being and ask questions
Well, that's
of
the
him.
thing too. Like he was an artist whose skills were
Yeah.
taken by the military industrial complex to to wreak havoc. And
Exactly. So it's really interesting because like on one level, maybe it sort of takes for granted that within the historical period when the movie was made, that a nuclear scientist in an insane asylum makes a certain amount of sense that you don't have to explain. Like
yeah,
Hmm.
he,
true.
Hmm.
there's that, but it's fascinating to me dramaturgically because it's like this third person becomes really other directed and is now in a way kind of ministering to Johnny, our supposed hero, anti-hero, protagonist,
Yeah.
whatever, who is cracking up. And the relationship sort of therapeutically has changed. Like
Because
Johnny
this
sort
is
of,
narratively,
yeah,
this is after Johnny has had a couple of breaks.
that's
By the
right.
time he gets to the third guy,
And
he's
that
already had
he's
the
gone.
breaks and maybe one shock therapy, which, man, I hadn't seen this in about 2-3
Ooh.
years.
Oof,
That was a hard scene to watch.
it's a hard scene.
And it
It's
goes on for a long time. When they touch those electrodes to R.P. McMurphy's head, it's pretty darn quick.
Yeah,
But here it goes on for a long time.
And I mean,
yeah.
anybody with any personal connections to like folks that experienced mental health crises in the 50s and 60s, like, I mean,
Oof.
I know people that had family members and who had people close to them. And in some ways you're like, I guess like the doctors were trying their best, maybe, like it wasn't all sadistic, but it was very damaging.
Well, and another thing that's interesting, like in the way that things proceed, is that early on we're giving the exploitative. Isn't it kind of funny to see how all these people are behaving? But then after the shock therapy, we get another sort of tour through the hallway, and people are doing the same stuff, and it does not. It plays in a very different way,
Hmm.
uh, and I don't see like a big difference in camera work. I don't see a big difference in performance. It's still people doing the same thing. It's that we've been through something in the movie that makes it impossible after a certain point to watch these, yeah, cartoonish versions of mental illness behaviors. Uh, they may be cartoonish, but they turn in emotional valence where this is not entertaining, this is not funny anymore, this is scary, this is and you can really feel that Fuller has compassion for all these people
Yeah,
that
Oh
it's
that
yeah.
he may have started out exploiting. He
it's
exploited to draw
sinister.
us in.
Yeah, it's sinister in a more sterile way that kind of points at, it's not that these are mustache twirling doctors who are getting
No,
off on harming these patients. It's the American health system and the
right,
American psychiatric system is like, again, Fuller taking aim at systems that are
right.
bad in order to help help humanity progress.
Well, that Johnny can game the system so much. He just gets
Right.
Philip on to help him out, and then as the doctor's asking questions, he's just like, he's going to ask about this next.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
so
we're
pleased
about
with
getting
himself.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you mentioned the camera work. I mean, we can't not talk about Stanley Cortez and just how
Stanley Cortez at
freaking
his best in this movie.
beautiful. It
Yeah.
looks so good. I mean, I'm watching this movie in 2024 and it's coming out in 1963. It feels like I could walk into the
Yeah,
screen. It just looks
absolutely.
so good. I could walk into that corridor, man. It felt like it was right there in my living room.
Yeah.
Especially the finale. I mean, we can skip like that surreal scene of
Oh
when
boy.
the thunder clap hits and he looks down and he goes, "Oh, like is it raining in here?" Like what a masterstroke. We talked about on our Naked Kiss episode when it gets surreal and they go on that gondola ride. That's kind of picturesque. This is
Oh God, we
it's
didn't even talk about his reuse of his own footage. Like
yeah.
Right.
using some of that
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Chiguero
yeah. The
stuff.
color.
Using, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did I
and
catch? I think that was
just
House of
blended.
Bamboo and
Yeah, it
Tigrero, maybe.
blended so beautifully with this stuff, and I was looking for the real changes and stuff because I'm like, how did you integrate this color footage into this black and white reel without, I guess, using an optical printer or something to get that all together? Because it was just interesting that you could do that, because normally if there's a color sequence, I mean, even go back and watch
Yeah.
Schindler's List, like, the one reel that had color because it significantly changed the way that everything was, and it
Yep.
was a full reel. So to have, like, even the end of World's Greatest Sinner, it's like you
Right.
go all the way through that with black and white, and then that reel change hits, and then boom, color is in there. Same thing with even Wizard of Oz. That's a real change coming up there, folks. So it's
Right.
interesting that to have that switch right there in the middle of these reels.
Well, and a
Very impressive.
subversive use of color here, to sort of and of quote unquote realism.
Yeah.
Like the color footage is not just that it's color, which is part of our real lives, if provided we have color vision, but is also like more documentary like in the way that it's shot and sort of how it enters. That we have these characters who are portraying mental illness, and the footage that represents their vision is actually in color, and one of them talks about how shocking it is for the dreams to be in color.
Yeah.
That's something that's pointed out verbally in the thing that like really shifts how we think about like color versus black and white and artifice in movies. Really messes around with our sense of what that's supposed to mean.
When I mentioned earlier that Gene Evans isn't really in this movie that much, if anything, the one who is in this movie, I would say almost up there with, might be even more than Constance Towers. Maybe not as much as Peter Breck, but it's Larry Tucker
Is that
coming in as
Pagliacci?
Pagliacci. Yeah,
Yep.
He's
Larry
incredible.
Tucker. I love Larry Tucker. If anyone within the sound of my voice has not seen Blast of Silence, you
Oh
have to
yeah.
check out Blast of Silence. He is so good in there. And that's his acting. I mean, he was an
Yeah.
amazing writer. He created television shows. He was one of the developers of the Monkees. I mean, he wrote
Well,
Bob
and
and
this
Carol
was
and
like
Ted and Alice. Yeah.
his launch. I checked it out because I was like, Fuller stuff usually got overlooked at the time, but in 1963, he got a Golden Globe nomination for like impressive newcomer for this movie.
Wow.
He's so
Wow.
good. He is
Yeah.
so good.
Remarkable. I mean, the whole cast is great. And this is one where like Fuller is working with actors who are up and comers or maybe fallen on some hard times a lot because of the nature of the budgets. But man, what an incredible director of actors he is. Like all these performances are so good, and they're not, I, I mean, some are somewhat more real. There's a mix of of technique here.
Sure.
Some are in a little bit more realistic kind of zone, and others are in a more arch kind of zone, and it all kind of comes together in a way that's like really fascinating and satisfying. I love the
Yeah,
performances in this movie.
even those tiny little roles, like the guy, and I don't remember what the actor's name is, but the guy, he's got a great face. And at one point, Harry Rhodes is going on one of his racist rants, and he's there like, Hallelujah! He's so
Yeah,
good.
I
I
think that
love that
might
guy.
be Paul Dubov, who I was looking up. He's in a lot of Fuller movies in various little roles. He's in several. And
yeah,
I mean, Sam had a little troupe where not all of them, but like he had a lot of people who worked with him again because he was beloved. I
yeah.
mean, listeners, if you maybe not familiar, check out the filmography, see which titles appeal to you, look them up. There's so many that are available now that are worth it. But I mean, you see all of his actors coming back to work with him. If you look into some of the interviews, like when when he was alive and when he passed, so many people had so many wonderful things to say about him because it was so like you can tell by the stories he tells. And if you listen to an interview, just how genuine the man is.
Oh God,
That's
I
great.
Like
love his voice. I love hearing him tell
it's the
stories. He's
greatest.
such a great raconteur, and you get that kind of like
Amazing.
thick New York with that just whatever gruffness he's got going on from all those cigars. He's
It's
great,
beautiful.
man.
So
Oh,
the documentary on the Criterion disc is excellent. I
Yeah.
haven't watched them yet. On the indicator set with all the Fuller films, there's the unedited interview footage
oh,
from
Mm.
Tim Robbins. There are like 2 4-hour sessions of just them talking
Oh,
that I can't wait to watch.
oh,
I
amazing.
just found out that actor's name is Niall Morrow.
Okay, that one,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And if you haven't seen the documentary that Fuller's daughter put together about him, it's
Oh,
really good as
A
well. And
Fuller
it's
Life.
yes, it's so well put together and just
That's
really
that's
just
on the
so
40
nice.
guns. I think I actually like that one a little bit more just because you see these stories you're like like he had the touch but you're like what kind of guy does
Yeah.
this, and A
it's
Fuller Life
incredible.
in particular just kind of shows how he's almost kind of like in the early way. I feel like somebody called him like the Forrest Gump of like America because he was there
He's just
through
there. Yeah.
so much things. And then like John Ford famously was a friend of Constance Towers. He came on set and was just like, "Oh wow, Sam,
Oh yeah.
you're really
That
going for it.
story she tells
You're gonna
about
upset
him
some
having
people."
tea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna really upset some people with this movie. And he goes, "I gotta do it. I gotta do it, Pappy." Like,
I just looked up that actor's filmography, and I would say 80% of what he did was working with Sam Fuller. So it's pretty
yes,
Well,
cool.
but and that's part of how an ensemble like this is so good from top to bottom is you have some new people or people like rotating in and out, but you've got this like base of a rep company that works with Sam Fuller over and over again that makes it possible for new actors to come in and do their best possible work.
I mean, while I love Ed Wood, I would love to see an Ed Wood treatment type thing for a Sam Fuller movie
Oh,
with
hey,
like
don't
absolutely.
say that
how
to me.
things
I'm
were.
I'm trying to sell that one to us. Like,
Oh man, all right, man. Feel
I
free
would
to leave that
love.
on the cutting
No,
room floor, my friend.
no. I I don't like I because I know you had Krista Langfuller on. Was that Fixed Bayonets or Run of the Arrow? What did you guys
I
do
think it
on?
was Run of the Arrow or
Yeah,
oh shoot, we've done a few. We've done
I
Big
think
Red
it was Run of
One.
the Arrow.
Yeah, it feels like we've done one more, but I've also guested on a few other people's shows. We're talking about like Pickup on South Street and stuff. And
Yeah,
Shot
my other
Corridor, I was
favorite.
talking with some guy, Phil, I think his name was.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I've considered reaching out to the Fuller estate, just going, hey, like we're kind of back in a season of maybe not as many people knowing. Like, I think if you get a good budget, like a Sam Fuller biopic would just be incredible.
Oh my
Like a
God,
Fuller
yeah.
life, but as a drama. Like there's so many, but then you're like, okay, like that has like how you got to make it like 100, or you got to make it like an hour 40 to 2 hours actually, because there's
What do you,
so
yeah,
much.
Oh yeah,
How do you
what
do
do
it?
you focus on? Like,
Yeah.
right.
yeah, no, it's wild. Well, I don't want to take the I don't want to take too much attention away from Fuller himself. But again, there are things going on in this movie that just wow me, and in part as a reaction against. I haven't even seen Dune 2 because I have no interest.
I saw you
But
guys going back and forth.
but the way that I just have no interest. Like one, there's a book out there that's fucking amazing that I love, and two, there's a Lynch movie out there that's amazing that I love. And so after Dune,
Cool guy
1,
did a
okay, fine.
commentary track on it. That was
Yeah,
very
I got it. That's right. It's a very good commentary. But so
Thank you.
one of the things in Shock Corridor that I find very interesting, that is not very common, that is like Lynch's Dune, is the kind of real-time voiceover. This is not a retrospective voiceover. This is not the tradition of voiceover where what we're seeing is positioned as in the past, while the voiceover is like in a present.
Sure.
That's kind of that's the usual way. You know, it happened like this. That, you know, the
Yeah.
sort of Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah,
style,
exactly.
You know, or the, you know, any number. I
Very
mean,
noir.
Christmas Story, and you can name all, any noir movie that has a voiceover, even like Blade Runner, you know, the original Blade Runner cut, when it had the voiceover, that voiceover is positioned in the past. This is a present tense, like in somebody's head while it's going on, voiceover, which a lot of people complain about in Dune, you know, Lynch's Dune, and it's one of my favorite things in that movie.
I like it
it's
in
wild.
Dune. Okay,
I love it here even more.
I don't hate it, but I recently, before Dune 2 came out, my local theater was playing Lynch's Dune, so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go see it.
Yeah,
it was a little bit much in the theater because it was just so much more than I remembered.
And you know what? When I saw it last theatrically, I was just dying because of so many of the scenes that aren't there from the longer version that I'm so used to now. I'm just like, wait a second, where was this? Where was the whole thing about Jamis? You know,
this is like the 20-minute
invoking the Antel rule. Yeah, it felt so short now. You know,
but it's fascinating to me that like I don't know if Lynch pulled directly, but there's so much in this movie that is Lynchian that I know it's like one of those things. It's one of those influences that, like Fuller generally, at least, is floating around in Lynch's head.
Oh yeah.
But it's interesting. I had kind of forgotten about that factor here, but Dune lately has been on the brain, and I watched Lynch's Dune again recently as my little act of defiance against Villeneuve. But but at any rate, like that's like one of those things that I think is kind of, you know, genuinely idiosyncratic and exciting in this movie. And another one of those instincts of like, well, I don't know, why not follow that? It seems absurd. It seems ridiculous, but like, maybe we get more interesting movies out of being absurd or ridiculous. Another thing about this movie, sort of connecting in a different direction, but I think that this also functions in an interesting way as a response to, I don't think it's intentionally so, but it's an interesting response to Psycho, in that we get this big explanatory Freudian lump of exposition at the end that even Hitchcock didn't like, but he recognized that he needed to put at the end of his movie.
Sure.
And it's kind of like all of Shock Corridor is tearing that apart, just like laying into that sort of, you know, misuse of Freud as let's explain everything away and let's land at this. And I think Hitchcock was a little bit on the same page in a way, because he delivers that whole Freudian monologue that explains it for the part of the audience that needs things explained, like a YouTube explainer, you know, but back in the 60s. But then puts a crazy scene right after that where Norman is talking to himself and its mother, and then there's the skull, you know, sort of transposed over his face, and then a weird shot. I mean, Psycho is so much weirder than its rep, and it ends on that weird shot of the car being pulled out of a swamp, like
with the chain that goes right into Norman's heart. Yeah,
exactly. So weird, and then also weird. Kind of voiceover narration that works differently, but the Janet, you know, Janet Leigh's imagination, and then Norman Bates's, you know,
she
Perkins's,
hears the voice of her boss in the discovery of the money, where she has no privilege, you know, that could be completely made up in her head. Talking about unreliable narrator here. Yeah, I love it.
Exactly. No, so it's
A
interesting
rich
thinking
heritage we have here.
Oh,
a rich
yes.
heritage, and it's interesting thinking of these movies as just a few years apart from each other, and how they intentionally or unintentionally talk to each other in this historical moment. In considering, like both of these, I mean, well, Psycho has like a ridiculously direct title that's like, here's what it's about. It's about psychotics, and then
Well, and
Shock
that's
Corridor.
exactly the difference between Fuller. It's like the nature and nurture. Like
Yeah.
Yeah,
the this guy's crazy, and Fuller's like America's crazy,
America's
Mhm.
crazy. Exactly. So
and
so
it
it's
is
really
making these people. And that goes back to Kathy's line at the beginning. What did she say? Like
Oh boy, her lines.
their sickness is bound to rub off on you,
that's
and
right.
and their sickness being emblematic of America, and especially the first two witnesses, like being admired in the culture. It's hard. Well, I mean, really, all three. It's hard not to be enmeshed in nationalism and racism and an unhealthy relationship with violence. Just being surrounded in the and again, Fuller's like, but we can be better. Like
Right.
this is the way it is, but it doesn't have to be. We can be better through the press, through education, through like true community, which is very interesting. The connection to Naked Kiss when she gets off the bus and Shot Corridor is
Yeah.
playing in this little town. Take out the Constance Towers connection. Just that's so interesting. All of the craziness that's happening in the town of the Naked Kiss, and like what they have at their multiplex is Shot
Right.
Corridor. That's just
Right.
such a nice, like, you could be like, oh, it's a self-reference, but like that's just such an interesting like little image there.
Well, and it's this social and systemic thing that I can say that both Hitchcock and Fuller are great, but Fuller is a more radical and engaged artist. Period. The end. And like, it not surprising that Hitchcock is the one who can get the big budget, and Fuller is stuck with a little budget. These are more radical ideas that can only kind of come up, especially at that time, through exploitation cinema. And I would argue that these are the kinds of ideas that only come up through like really small and exploitation cinema now.
True.
The big budget cinema is not going to be there for this kind of direct critique of system, and critics tend not always to be there to understand it. A few steps behind.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts? I mean, the ending was not shocking. I mean, they kind of called their shot at the beginning, like, you're gonna go crazy if you go in there. But then
Well, yeah.
the direct, again, the very directness of, oh, like a psychotic man won the Pulitzer Prize. Like that's just also like a funny little line too.
Well, that's also part of that's the ending is part of where I go,
Because
oh,
he
this
gets
is
his prestige.
Yeah.
right, but it's
He
also
gets the
deeply
payoff.
it's deeply unreliable. It feels it like the ending of this movie is not shocking because it's because of the like manifest content being like so violent, or so mind bending, or what have you. It's more shocking on the level of like, oh wait, this story is like, that ending does not make sense, and
No.
it doesn't make sense in a way that I think is part of the critique. There's like on there's one absurd level of, oh, he won a Pulitzer, but he's struck dumb by the experience that got him there. Well, okay, that's a pretty straightforward kind of
Yeah.
idea of how one engages with the system. But then on another level, if you take his goal as a protagonist to get this Pulitzer at the beginning, then this is like the nightmare. This is the nightmare version of that working out.
Yeah.
And it's in the dream realm. It is not necessarily in the reality realm, but that's what's also unreliable. Like, I don't like when I invoke an unreliable narrator, I'm not coming down on one side or another. Like, there's a bothness to this where you can take, and this is an influence, for instance, on the ending of Taxi Driver, or the ending of The Sopranos, or take your pick,
Oh,
ambiguous sort of ending.
perfect
But like,
ending.
where a perfect ending, yeah, where we're presented with like conflicting information, and we have a movie that has led us to a point to really question um, you know, what's real and what is, and more importantly, what's of value. I mean, the point here isn't just to like blow your mind, what's actually real, man, but it's like, what is of value? Is the Pulitzer of value? Is the
Certainly,
dream of
certainly
getting
not
the
to Johnny
Pulitzer?
at this point.
Not to
Yeah.
Johnny, yeah, and it's the dream of getting the Pulitzer of value, you know, within this story. Of course not.
It's
And what
interesting because every time I watch this film, I forget that he is going after the Pulitzer because at first we're being coached with the whole incest thing. And
Right,
so I'm just like, okay, his goal is to get into this place. Like, I think, Nellie Bly, I don't think of anything
right,
else. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, he has another purpose for going in there, but it seems so much more focused on the incest stuff. And that's, comes back at the end when suddenly he can't even take Kathy touching him. And he
right.
just, she wants to kiss him. And he's just like, oh, I can't do that. And he's completely changed his mind. It's interesting that in any other film, we would get people like torturing him more with like bright lights and like parallax view type videos and things to be like, you do not love your sister, this is wrong, just that, those kind of things. We don't get that. We just suddenly at the end he's like, oh, I don't touch me that way, this is awful. And going back again to the parallels, I'm loving this conversation because there's things I'm not thinking of where, I'm talking about all of these things that Johnny's doing that are coming back and things. Well, there's the patient where they hold up his hand and they just have
Right.
him there. And then Johnny at the end has his hand out the same exact way.
Well, and what does that look like?
exactly.
Oh,
You
it's
know,
so, yeah. I mean, they even moved the hand up at one point.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's no, there's a, you know, you see the hand and it's kind of, oh, this is so visually amazing because the hand is just in the corner of the screen
Yeah.
at this one point. It's like, why is there that hand? What's going on? And then it pulls out to a wider and it's just this guy holding his hand up. And then there's a wider still that's like a kind of tableau of the whole corridor, and it's at that point that it sinks in that this is the Sieg Heil. It is, and then that's what Johnny has at the end, through the ministrations of the doctor, who has hypnotized him in some way to
Mhm.
make him better. This is wild.
I want to express my sincere disappointment in both of you guys because we're talking about influences this entire time. No one's bringing up Sucker Punch. What about America's greatest director, Zack Snyder? This is obvious that there's an influence there with Baby and the way that
I
she goes through
genuinely
everything.
never thought so not like Snyder and Snyder's fans are maybe different. Like Sucker Punch was one for a while. Like now it's just hard to kind of engage with his stuff because of all of the
Yeah.
insane like community that has built around him for various reasons that I'm not even terribly interested in. But like Sucker Punch was one for a while where I was like, guys, like I think there's maybe a little bit more here than like an exploitation of like anime girls in short skirts. Like this is a little interesting, but yeah, I never thought about the fuller
I,
potential
well,
connection.
I
Completely
mean,
disappointed. I
I
look
have
down at both of you.
I do have some sympathy for Zack Snyder auteur.
Sure.
I don't love his films, but for instance, like if you want a demonstration of like directorial style, whether good or bad versus non-style, watch the two versions of Justice League. I am not going to throw down for Justice League is actually a good movie, but I will say that if you compare the Snyder to the whatever
It's a
Joss Whedon
distinct. It's
non-Snyder,
a
it's a
strong.
distinct difference.
It is
No,
strong. Yeah.
it's no,
Good or bad.
one is
Yeah.
a not very good movie by a director, and the other is a bad movie by I don't know what. Like I'm not even going to blame Joss Whedon. It's like
It's a
that is
corporate nonsense. Yeah.
yeah, it's corporate
Mhm.
nonsense. It's just it's like it's sort of a nothing. So I did. Mike, you're right. I didn't see the connections to Zack Snyder in Shock Corridor, but Zack Snyder, I have my sympathy for, and I actually kind of,
Who
he's got a
started with his
style.
Romero
He's
riff, and then he
Yeah,
mid
Yeah,
levels.
yeah.
yeah.
What's next for him?
What's next?
I mean, I can't remember when the Snake Pit came out. I want to say it was prior to this, so I don't know. I've never seen the Snake Pit. That was another one that was tough to find for a while. The Olivia
Yeah.
de Havilland film, but I've really grown fond of her lately, and I think I might have to check that one out.
Have you ever done a Lady in the Cage episode?
No, no,
You,
we've
Oh,
done the
Snake
uh,
Pit was
Mafu cage.
48. That was
if
way
Okay,
oh man, well, if you do Lady in a Cage, call me.
all
I
right.
definitely want to be on that one. That's a crazy movie. Um,
That was the following year. That was 64.
So yeah, yeah. I mean, that period, the exploitation films get really, really wild. You know, not just. I mean, Fuller is his own thing. He's out there, and you know, people obviously Corman we celebrate, and
Mhm.
he's, you know, kind of hitting some good years then. But man, yeah, the the early to mid '60s exploitation scene, there is a lot of exciting stuff there, and Fuller is totally at his peak in this period.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I love his 50s because he did
Absolutely,
so many. Like I recently
so many films.
Mhm.
did an episode with some friends on 40 Guns, and that was his third movie that year that he made.
Right,
Wow, jeez.
man alive.
But
Yeah,
anyway,
I don't
no,
know.
yeah, everybody should check out some Sam Fuller. And Shot Corridor is not always the first I recommend, but if you're adventurous and you're familiar, you're literate in some of these things that we're talking about, yeah, Shot Corridor, Naked Kiss, primo double feature. I'm working on talking with some of the people at some of the local theaters here in KC. I would love to, because last year was the 60th. This year's the 60th of Naked Kiss. Like, I think we could do some nice homages. Get the new get the kids into some Sam
Yeah,
Fuller.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, I've got to start teaching Sam Fuller in a more aggressive way. Like, you know, I have, I've shown the amazing musical number with the kids in
Rips
My
my
Naked
heart.
Kiss.
dear.
Oh, and it just, it's the kind of thing that, like, people go, what the hell is this, what are you showing me?
Yeah.
But the camera work is so beautiful, and the whole scene is so strange, truly dreamlike, without having like a lot of pyrotechnics or anything to it. And that's the, I mean, that is the Fuller way, is that, like, yes, he'll
Yep.
bring on the pyrotechnics when he wants to, and we get some of that in Shot Corridor, but there is a wonderful, surreal, dreamlike sense that he can access sometimes. It's, you know, just, you almost go, wait, how did you do that? How exactly, and like, how did you come up with that? And part of it is that he'll shoot it like it's the most obvious thing in the world. You know, like, that's the true shock of the wig coming off at the beginning of Naked Kiss,
Well, and
is
that's
that,
the thing in this movie where the screen is flipped. He's
yeah,
upside down in the
yes,
rain in the corridor. You're like, this is
yep,
like
Yep,
the most
the way it had to
captivating
be shot.
image. And I just watched it like on Blu-ray, like, and it looks amazing. So I mean,
amazing.
I like we give Criterion a lot of crap for some of the balls they're dropping, but God bless them for keeping some of these things in print. And call me if you ever put out a 4K and want to get a commentary track. Hardly
I'll
any of
throw
the
out one
Fuller
more
movies
influence. I
get
have to. I
commentary
have to throw out one
tracks.
more influence. Shot Corridor. I could not stop thinking about Ernie Gare's Serene Velocity, which is like really intense avant-garde. It's a structuralist film. It's like just a shot of a hallway where the frame is kind of messed with on every frame, and it creates
Huh.
this like
Is this a
hypnotic
short film?
vibration to it. Yeah, it's a short film.
I have never
It
heard of this.
creates a hypnotic vibration to it. But was it influenced by Shot Corridor? I don't
Well,
know, but I wonder if something was in the air or in the water or in the acid or what have you that got Ernie Gare to do it. But
what was it? A influence on Russian Ark? With that,
what exactly?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's that the bigger influence that once it's out there in enough people's brains, it gets passed along, and you don't even
It's a
know
it's a
that you're
meme,
influenced
baby.
by it.
The
Yeah,
original, the original version of the word
the
meme.
original version of meme. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Well,
So
fellas, I'm so glad we got the Fuller band back together for this one.
same.
This was a real pleasure.
so fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
So,
so much.
before I let you go, two things. One, at the end, we'll get the plugs in, but we've mentioned a lot of things, and if listeners have their notes apps or their letterbox accounts out, there's plenty of good stuff to add to the watch list. But have you guys watched or read anything recently that you want to put on people's radar that you'd say is really worth checking out?
Mm. Um, well, actually, it's weird because I happen to be reading. I'm not done with it yet, but because I happen to be reading it right now, it was a little bit in my mind while watching Shot Corridor again. This new book on the political history of the '90s by John Gans called "When the Clock Broke." Let me get the exact title. Uh, yeah, When the Clock Broke by John Gans. I've been reading that, and it's interesting because the reason why I'm bringing it up in this context is that so much in Shot Corridor actually felt remarkably depressingly contemporary and kind of fresh. Like we're still dealing with a lot of the same stuff. And one
Yeah,
of the things
3 out
about
of
this book,
3 are still
yeah, exactly,
completely
3 out of
relevant.
3, we're still dealing with it. And when the clock broke is very much about like the racial politics of the '90s, the resulting from a lot of the choices made in the era when Fuller's film was made, and that feels remarkably and depressingly contemporary right now. So that's like a really fun, great book that
Interesting.
I recommend.
That is kind of, I mean, oh man, it's kind of on a 30-year cycle, like the 60s, the
I,
90s, and the 2020s. Like there are a lot of
there's a
unfortunate
lot.
parallels.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Jeez. Mike, what do you got?
Well, I am coming back from the Nitrate, what do they call it? The Nitrate Picture Show. I also say just the Nitrate Film Fest over in Rochester, New York. Saw a lot of great movies there, all on Nitrate. Just they looked fantastic. But the two that really stood out for me this year were the comedies that they showed.
Hmm.
The Good Fairy from it was a Preston Sturges script, and can't remember the director of that one, but oh my gosh, it was so funny.
I have
Um,
to see this.
you have to see this. It is so good. Alan Hale was the surprising star of the show because he was in The Good Fairy. The next morning they showed Stella Dallas, and
Huh.
then that night they showed The Strawberry Blonde, which is the other movie I would recommend, which was that was James Cagney as a dentist who gets kind of hornswoggled by a friend of his. He ends up going to jail, and he comes back and he's going to get revenge on him. It's amazingly funny. And speaking of Olivia de Havilland, she is incredibly cute in that movie, and Rita Hayworth is in that film, and
Oh,
it is
fantastic.
just a terrific movie. And really to
Like
see
your 2-word
Cagney,
letterbox log. Amazingly funny.
yeah, that was it.
Right to the point. I
So
like it.
yeah, Strawberry Blonde is terrific as well. And then yeah, seeing Cagney in a comedy is always a treat.
So you said the Good Fairy. What was the other one? Did he say the name?
Strawberry Blonde. Hmm.
Strawberry Blonde.
Good Fairy and Strawberry Blonde. Gonna see those.
Are these
Uh,
coming out on disc anywhere, or is there any way to see these other than?
Probably. I'm not sure.
Well, be
Bootlegs.
envious, listeners, if you
Yeah,
can find them.
Yeah.
I
I'll
mean they are definitely. Let's say they're definitely out there. So yes,
Yeah.
where
All right.
Spencer's headed is exactly where I went.
Where
So
you find them. I will.
mhm.
Nice.
I'll maybe go down that path as well. I'll say one of the things that I've been very into lately because I've been very busy and not had as much time as I would like to uh, watch some of the more the films that take more work. I've been sorting some of my letterbox watch lists by shortest movie. So I've been watching a lot of like 80-minute movies lately and
Well,
trying to
there you
work through
go. You're
some
welcome.
work through some of my physical media collection that I haven't watched. I just watched for the first time the other night The Snake Girl and the Silver Haired Witch, and it was a delight.
Mm.
It's ostensibly a children's horror film that in some ways has some like graphic and shocking stuff, but is also
Mm,
you don't actually see as much as you think you see. And they put this little girl through all this terrible stuff, but it is also kind of a very sweet and humane film in a lot of ways. And I mean, not quite Fuller-esque or whatever, but like this very sweet little girl kind of uh perseveres through a lot of gnarly stuff. But my kid came out through one part and I was like, "Ugh." And he asked me a couple of questions. He goes, "Oh, I'd like to watch this one day." And I was like, "Okay, well, this will be fun." So it's been on my list. I heard a lot of great stuff. It's by the guy who did all the original Gamera movies. He made this
Oh, sweet.
weird
mm,
one-off children's horror movie that is a lot of things, but is a lot of fun and is 82 minutes.
nice.
Fantastic.
So if you have Shudder, that's an easier one to see.
Oh, sweet. Shutter. Nice.
So
Looks like Strawberry Blonde is definitely out on Blu-ray, and I haven't looked up Good Fury yet, but I would not be surprised if that one was as well because it definitely seems like it should be. Yes, it is. There's even a special edition on Blu-ray.
beautiful.
Oh, terrific.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'll track it down.
Hmm.
Mike, where can the listeners find you? What do you have cooking right now?
Oh, I got so many things cooking. You know how it goes.
You do.
Working on Sci-Fi July. Next month will be. I don't remember if we have a theme next month, but been doing a lot of requests. We're just finishing up a request month right now. The listeners gave me some great ones to run through. A couple from '67, so Cool Hand Luke and The Graduate. So that
Nice.
kind of like pre or right there on the cusp, new Hollywood stuff. So good. And yeah, just been having a great time with that. And everything that I do, that show, the projection booth, talking about Barney Miller and Columbo and assorted other 70s characters, that's all over at weirdingwaymedia.com. So everything's right there, easy peasy.
Nice.
Spencer, what about you?
Well, I got a recent interview with John McNaughton up at Split Tooth Media about Wild Things, and hope to have a couple more interviews with him about deeper cuts soon. And also at Split Tooth, you can check out a thing that I wrote last fall for Halloween about. Franchise surrealism in the Friday the 13th series, and how those films are actually so much better and richer and crazier when taken all together than when treated as individual. And yeah, I'll say I've really come to love Friday the 13th movies in a way I never would have expected,
Interesting.
precisely because they're a weird kind of capitalist corporate product that is not always kind to artists.
It's true.
That's a strange thing about those movies. They're not artist driven, and yet they're a vision over the course of the series.
Have you
It's
been able
okay.
to
He
catch
just wants his machete back.
And he just wants his machete back. Yeah,
have you been able to catch In a Violent Nature yet?
I haven't yet. Friends have told me different things about it.
Very
I've heard good.
interesting.
I've heard
Very
bad.
interesting. I'm glad I
But
got to see it opening weekend with a big crowd. Like
oh, that's
Mm,
great.
yeah.
it was a really fun experience. I wasn't bowled over about it. I absolutely didn't hate it at all. Like I thought a lot of what they did was cool. And like I love seeing you talked about Zack Snyder. I love seeing somebody like having a goal and executing it. And like no pun intended. Like,
Mhm.
Right.
but it was it was interesting. I enjoyed the experience. Whatever
Yeah, I
they do
definitely.
next, I'm in for it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I definitely plan to check it out. I've heard some interesting stuff.
The big moment is very gnarly. Very gnarly.
Excellent.
Hmm.
Well, fellas, thanks for coming on. This was a blast. Everybody, check out some Sam Fuller and tell a friend. So there you go. That was me, Mike, Spencer, talking Sam Fuller in Shot Corridor. Great movie. And if you enjoyed that conversation and you checked out the movie, the very first thing I would suggest you do is go over to Mike's feed over at the projection booth. Check out our episode from last November on the Naked Kiss, where all three of us are on there talking. And like I mentioned at the top, 2 stars of the film. That's an episode that I'm extremely proud of. And Mike did phenomenal work with his interviews on those segments as well. We also would love to hear from you. If you watched the film and enjoyed it, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, or you can email us a voice note to thesubstancepod@gmail.com. And would love to hear your thoughts on it, especially if this is not a filmmaker you're familiar with and you checked it out. Would love to hear your thoughts. Also, the biggest way to support the show, if you like The Substance, you like our substantive cinema episodes, share them with your friends. Text them, share them on social media. If you're in group chats or discords or what have you, share it. Say, hey, check this out. This is some good stuff. And then also, if you want to send us suggestions as well, you can email or DM us suggestions for future topics. And as always, if you want to support with your wallet, you can do so at Cash App, $, the Substance Pod. If you want to send us a few bucks, or you can sign up in the link on Spotify to be a monthly supporter. Now that episodes are coming out more regularly, I think we can maybe start talking about incentives and bonuses and stuff like that, perhaps. But those of you who are still with us, supporting monthly or sending us a little bit here and there, we greatly appreciate you. Next week, I can tell you we are going to have an episode. This is a conversation I recorded a week or two ago with friend of the show, Abby Olchesi. Her new book, Films for All Seasons, which looks at the church calendar and suggests films to watch along with the church calendar, like Advent, Lent, Epiphany, Christmas, and so on. It's a wonderful book, and so glad that it's finally out in the world. And next Sunday, you can look for my conversation here with Abby. So I've been your host, Philip Marinello. Had a great time talking some Sam Fuller, and we will see you again next time on The Substance.